Hey, what's going on, DDO players? Axel here. So, we got some more huge news lately. Just the past several weeks have been nothing but gigantic piece of news after gigantic piece of news. The game is being changed in very big ways, and if you haven't been following, check out my previous several videos where I've talked about changes to things like Epic Destinies, which is definitely the biggest change, which is update 51 stuff. But now we're going into update 50, and I'm a little late on this. This came out last week. I did do a Twitch stream where I went through this stuff and gave my initial impressions, but I wanted to do a follow up video just to give my complete thoughts on it. So, update 50, as of last week, the preview, they announced huge changes to both items at endgame, current endgame, and monsters. So, in a nutshell, and we'll go through this whole post, but in a nutshell, what they're doing is they are nerfing monsters a lot at endgame. And in addition to that, they are also nerfing in-game gear in a very big way. So let's just talk about it, okay? And let's start with the top here with Kokomajobo's post. He says, with Update 50, we are making some adjustments to curtail power creep within DDO's endgame, focusing specifically on the power level of items at the level cap. These adjustments will change how you approach gearing and will encompass both adjustments to player power in addition to content difficulty. We want to go into more detail about why we're doing this and what it means, and we look forward to hearing from you after checking things out on Lamania. Continues, we have steadily increased the amount of power available in itemization in order to provide a sense of progression as our endgame has matured. This strategy has resulted in two long-term challenges, both of which we are here to address. Challenge 1, item power level increases over time as we release new content. Challenge 2, as we follow along with this system of progression, we in turn increase the difficulty of content to provide challenge. This leads to a situation where content meant to be played at a certain character level ends up with a wide range of difficulty. With those two challenges in mind, we are aiming to equalize and reduce the power level of items found in in-game content and adjust the power level of monsters at in-game to match. Okay, so essentially what they're referring to here is the way that DDO's endgame has progressed in the last, well, really ever since level cap has been 30. What they've been doing is over time, they've been increasing content in terms of difficulty and the power level of the items over time while not increasing the cap. So what this has resulted in is certain content being both more difficult and having more desirable loot, even though it's the same level. So for example, the loot in Sharn and Feywild is better in packs like the Disciples of Rage pack or Ravenloft, for example, even though it's all in-game content. So what they want to do, and this is stuff they're doing with the level cap increase in mind, so the level cap is going up. They want to level all this out, flatten all it out, so that content at like certain content at level 30 in-game stuff is not more difficult and doesn't have more desirable loot in it than other in-game stuff. So what they're going to do is go through and level up the difficulty of the content and the item power themselves. So let's continue, and we're going to talk first about what they're doing in terms of itemization. And of course, this is all subject to change. It's on Lamania, it's in preview, it's not out in the game yet, so but it's coming with update 50. But this stuff, at least the specifics, are subject to change. I very much doubt they would redact this completely at this point, but let's continue. So solution part 1, itemization. In summary, named items found within legendary content will be adjusted and normalized to values appropriate to their minimum level. This means that an item found within Ravenloft will match the power of an item found within Sharn or Feywild or any of our other current legendary content. This adjustment will pull the item values to more reasonable levels across the board, resulting in a more streamlined curve. This will not affect anything other than the named items found within legendary content and crafted loot that use the minimum levels 31 to 34 shards. I won't not affect items found within events or anything else other than named items found within legendary content and crafted loot. Items will be adjusted in place without any necessary intervention on the player's part. These items will continue to drop in the same place they do currently. Items with crafted components, such as in Slave Lords, will have their crafted components adjusted. Set bonuses at endgame will have the numerical power adjusted to appropriate values. So, for example, the Sharn sets will have their power adjusted. The plus W bonus from Keen, and they talked about Keen a little bit, has been adjusted to instead provide a complete fortification bypass on a natural 20 instead of what it does now, which is basically extend your critical threat range, which does not stack with improved critical feat. Raid items and minor artifacts will retain their proportional power boost to other items at the same level. So that means that even though minor artifacts and raid items are at the same level, they'll continue to be a little bit better. And they do that, I mean, for raid specifically, because it's more difficult to get those items because raids are a higher level challenge. Minor artifacts, I've never been a fan of those, but for whatever reason, those are in the game. That's a separate discussion. But I just mainly don't like them because they just made loot Tetris even more complicated, and I didn't see a reason for it. But anyways, I don't need to talk about that. Let's continue on with the rest of this stuff. But what this means is that the items you find in in-game will be lower in item power than they were before, but are now evenly scaled across content packs. So that's the big thing to keep in mind here. They're doing it's going to be a big power reduction in the items you have currently. So you have to keep in mind before you pull out the torches and pitchforks that they are also majorly nerfing monster power, and we'll get into that in a bit. But essentially what they say here is this means that an item found in Feywild will be as equally as strong as an item found within Sharn or Ravenloft. So no more of this. The most recent expansion is the most powerful one. I mean, I'm sure we'll see what Saltmarsh is, but as of right now, Sharn and Ravenloft are going to be just as powerful as Feywild. And I assume also Saltmarsh, because I believe Saltmarsh is going to be like at the same level as like Feywild and stuff. But we'll see when we get into that. But in any case, like I said before, the power level of the loot is going to be equal now. So there's going to be this gigantic pool of loot at current endgame that's going to be really equal in value. So that's going to result in everyone's going to have to reevaluate in terms of reevaluate their in-game gear set if you're looking to min-max at current in-game. Maybe not as much going forward, just because level 30 is not going to be the cap probably for too much longer. So it's going to turn into leveling gear, but it's going to no longer be cap gear. So it's a little bit more flexible in that, a lot of people who are in-game players who want to stick at cap, may not necessarily, if you're like me, like I will min-max to the best extent I can when it comes to my in-game loot, when it comes to my leveling loot. I know some people like to min-max at certain levels, but I just kind of throw on whatever I have. And I don't really care much except until I get a cap. But in any case, let's continue on to this graph here. And this is where they're showing what the current stats are going to be at. So to provide some concrete context, this is where the numbers will likely end up at current level cap. Also note that raid items and artifacts will be a few steps higher than what's shown here as well. So they're showing now where the main stats are going to be adjusted to. So this is a big reduction. So for example, main stat, they're saying right now main stat level 13. If I remember correctly, we have stat items in Feywild, they're like 21, and minor artifacts from Feywild that are like 22. And I believe Sharn as well. I'll put a notation down below if I'm wrong on that. But you can you can compare all these different stats on this chart to current in-game gear if you want to go on the DDO wiki, stuff like that. I'll also throw a couple examples right now on the screen of gear that I can compare. I grabbed some screenshots of gear on Lamania when this was in preview. So as you can see here is some on the left. You can see gear that it is currently on live, and on the right you can see the gear as it is currently on Lamania. So here's some examples of loot and how it will change, but just keep in mind pretty much all these stats are going to go down on current in-game loot, all the ones listed here. So that's a big change, and before you cry nerf and stuff, you have to keep in mind that they're doing this to also match monster power. So monster power is going to be majorly nerfed, and we'll get into that now. So solution part 2, monster power. We have been increasing the power level of monsters found at the level cap as the power of items increase over time. And since we are adjusting these items downwards, we will be adjusting monsters downwards to match. The most notable change with this system is the removal of the legendary tier system as it relates to monsters. A monster at endgame will ideally be just as difficult no matter what dungeon is found in. The removal of legendary tier system will represent a significant reduction in the offensive and defense statistic of monsters found at the level cap, which means that monsters will be much weaker than they were before. We are also removing epic and hard saves boosts found on all monsters across our epic content. Given that each monster in our game has different stats and therefore a different starting point, it is hard for us to tell you exactly where each number will end up, but we can give out some comparisons to help demonstrate how dramatic this change may be. For example, monsters across all levels of epics, and this is pretty important right here, especially for DC casters. We'll have 6 fewer saving throws in monsters endgame specifically. We'll have 16 fewer saves. This does not include our current planned removal of Epic Resilience, which will remove an additional 6 saving throws for a total reduction of 22. So that's huge. So monsters are losing 22 to their saving throws. So as you can see, they are nerfing our DC gear, but as many other DDO content creators have pointed out already, the reduction to the monster saves is definitely looks like it's going to be larger than what we're losing in gear. So yes, we're losing some power in like DC gear and main stat gear and things like that. But the monsters, I mean, a 22 reduction in saving throws, that's gigantic. So it should be, and they did mention this also in the Update 51 previews, they're looking to up DC casting and stuff a bit. So I don't think, just looking at this, it should be easier for you to hit your DCs, not harder. So keep that in mind. They continue, monsters will not just be losing saving throws. The legendary tier 2 buff corresponding to 100% fortification bypass, 60 attack bonus, and 10 spell penetration, as well as a whole host of other offensive and defensive buffs designed to make them hit harder and take more hits. We hope that our monster rescaling ends up making content feel more realistic and more accessible, and are able to do more adjustments if necessary. Okay, they continue, and I don't think I'm going to read all this, but they list some short-term and long-term benefits here. So some of the reasons they're making these changes: content pack parity, cannon crafting viability, make that more valuable, random loot viability, augment scaling, avoiding difficulty spikes so that some content isn't so much harder than others. I mean, I think we did see this, for example, Ravenloft's a lot easier than Feywild. Impact on content creation, being able to use existing monster formulas without the need for additional off time, so it makes it easier for the developers to create content. Combat and statistical granularity. One of the game's greatest strengths is the granularity of numbers and its content, but working with larger numbers is generally more challenging. So simplify things, smooth leveling to make it more of a smooth experience, because content is, instead of you being spikes and certain content being, harder than others, it's going to be smoother to level up. Future-proof design. One of the biggest benefits of this change is how future-proof it is. We will only need to do this adjustment one time. Okay, great. So initial takeaways and my thoughts on this. It's a lot to take in, and they're being really transparent here, but still there's so much to this that it's going to be hard to tell what the game will feel like until the stuff is put into place, until we get to play with it for a while. Now, their goal here, I've heard different things, but what they want to do, with their target here, this is according to what I heard last week on the Wednesday live stream from a developer that was on there with Cordovan. They want to, with the standard difficulty, so normal, hard, elite, their target is to make the content hopefully feel about the same in terms of challenge level as it is prior. Now, with Reaper difficulty is where I've heard different things. Reaper difficulty, I've heard talk of developers they may not touch that. They've definitely not been final on this yet, but they may not be averse to making Reaper harder, so maybe they don't adjust it as much. But there's really nothing final. It's still in preview. We don't know. Bottom line, we don't know. All we know is that the standard difficulties, their target is to keep it the same in terms of challenge, and the Reaper, we really don't know. May get harder. That's possible. So now my major concern about all this is balance, because they're making so many changes to the game, huge sweeping changes. With this plus all the Epic Destiny changes, we're talking think about what they're doing at post level 20. We've got all new enhancement trees, all new monsters, all new content, because they're scaling everything. The monsters in the content, so the content itself, they're changing all the stats on all the loot and all the enhancement trees. They're like redoing the whole game. So my initial concern is balance. We'll see what happens when all this comes out, but I don't see any chance that they hit their target on this. There's just way too many changes, way too many factors. So balance is my main concern. When this stuff comes out, we're going to see certain content. It may be too difficult, maybe way too easy. We're going to see, especially when it comes to the Update 51 stuff, I think we're going to see big balance issues with the new Epic Destiny trees. Not that the developers aren't capable of balancing that stuff. It's just when the team is the size it is, and the changes that they're making are so vast, and they have to match the new enhancement trees to the new level of the monsters. I just don't see any way they hit their target. I don't think it's going to happen. So my main concern right now is I understand where they're going with this, and I think the goal is reasonable here. I just don't think they're going to hit it out of the gate. And my main concern is that they won't hit it for a long time. So DDO has had a history of putting stuff in the game with major balance concerns, whether that's underpowered, like certain enhancement trees not touching them for years, or overpowered, things like Alchemist or Warlock that came out and were overpowered and they didn't touch for a long time. But that's their reputation that precedes them there, is that they have not, they tend to let stuff go in terms of balance for long periods of time. So I hope the game is not a balanced mess for like a year after these changes are put in. Like, I hope that they concentrate on this and not just release it and forget about it, or not just release it and say, oh, we need to gather data for 6 months before we can make any changes. No, they need to actually make changes on a, really be upfront about the changes, whether it's stuff that's underpowered or overpowered, to hit their goals. So my main concern is that they don't do that, and they just let the game be a balanced mess for a year. And that's going to really not be fun for anybody, whether your build or class or the content is overpowered or underpowered. Wouldn't be fun if the content comes out and it's too easy or too hard. We want it to actually hit the mark. Now, I think they will with the regular difficulties, normal, hard, elite. They'll hit that, I think, at some point. With Reaper, there's more to say, because at least the developer in the Wednesday live stream last week didn't seem to be averse to making Reaper harder. I think there is some concern with players feeling like those who have not already farmed out the Reaper points are just going to have a harder time, or players, I guess this relates more to up to 51 stuff, who have not already done their Epic Pass lives, are now going to have to face a harder challenge to get the same rewards. I actually agree with the developer last week in saying that I think Reaper is also too easy right now. Personally, I've always had the philosophy that something like Reaper 10 should basically be impossible for anybody. Reaper 10 anything. I think it's really healthy for the game that there is always something greater to strive for in terms of difficulty, even for the best of the best players. So I'm not adverse to Reaper being harder, being made harder. As far as the lower Reapers, though, like Reaper 1, 3, and 4, I'm not sure. I do think there is a bit of a barrier to entry with Reaper right now, just because there's so much player power in getting the, say, like first 21 Reaper points, especially because there are certain cores in the Reaper trees that apply outside of Reaper, and that gives your character a lot of power. So I do think that there can be a little bit of a bit of a concern here with players who don't already have, say, like their first 21 Reaper points, or just for also new players, from being even more kind of barriered out of entry into the Reaper kind of meta, I guess you could say. So if they do make Reaper harder, I probably don't want to see like the lower Reapers get harder, but maybe mid and high Reaper would be reasonable to make those harder, just because I want players to be able to like get in and at least grind out that first like 21 Reaper points. The next concern is gear Tetris. So with all of this new loot in game now and everything being smoothed out, it's going to be nuts. Like everyone's going to have to look at their gear set, at least for if you want to min max currently at end game at level 30 for however much longer it remains end game, because all of a sudden all that gear from places like Ravenloft, for example, is now going to be competitive with Feywild gear. So you're going to have to relook. So it's going to be crazy trying to calculate all that stuff, and I hate that. I hate that gear Tetris is even more complicated. I wish they would simplify that stuff going forward. But in any case, you're going to need to look at your gear set if you're min-maxing. And also for leveling, so there might be stuff that you might want to use instead of just wearing like heroic Sharn gear, for example, all the way to cap. There might be stuff in there that might be worth using at certain levels, especially when we get into the Scroll Seal Shard revamp, which I'll talk about in another video. But Gear Tetris is going to go up. You're going to have to revisit that stuff. And along with Gear Tetris, I will say this again as kind of a mini rant. I wish DDO would make it easier to swap stuff out. So I'm referring most specifically to Jeweler's Toolkits. Those things should drop much more often in game, or should be a lot cheaper in the store. It's ridiculous that I have to give SSG like $20 anytime I want to swap around the augments on my main characters. It's ridiculous. Next concern, what about the other epic gear? So stuff like Wayloon gear or Menace of the Underdark gear. That stuff with this pass apparently is not going to be touched, and that gear is already really weak. When you look at Menace of the Underdark stuff, that stuff is really old, not useful. That stuff I wish would get touched as well, other epic gear. So this legendary gear they mentioned here in the Scroll Steel Shard stuff is getting touched, but some of that other stuff is not, apparently. So I want to see that stuff touched as well. And also other packs that aren't like the High Road pack, for example. I don't think that gear is being touched either. So I'd like to see other epic gear get touched and also pulled up to current day standards. I guess the last thing I'll say as a comment is I wish they would have been more upfront about all this stuff, specifically the monster nerfs, before they released the update 51 preview. I know they did mention it like briefly, but they weren't all that upfront about it, and I think that would have saved SSG a lot of negative feedback when it came to the update 51 preview, and probably would have given them better feedback in the update 51 preview if they would have been just really, really upfront about the fact that they are scaling monsters down. People wouldn't have freaked out as much about the big reduction in power with a lot of the Epic Destinies or the changes with a lot of the Epic Destiny trees. We will see how things start going forward. I guess as a side note, I talked about in previous videos about the possibility of making videos on the new revised Epic Destiny trees. I think I decided on that to wait because they're probably going to change a lot. So maybe next preview, I'll do more in-depth videos on those. I just don't want to waste my time actually making videos on that stuff if they're just going to be dramatically changed and the video be instantly outdated. So I think I'm going to wait on those, but I will do more videos on some of this other update 50 stuff that came out last week. Yeah, guys, that's going to be it for this video. If you'd like to support this channel, I do have a Patreon. I will link that below if interested. That's going to be it. Hope you all have a good one. See you all next time. Take care.